lovely Mrs. Dreves said, I do have a lot on my plate this weekend. How many of you are freaking out because of social studies methods fields? I have heard that there's a couple. You don't need to raise your hands. A few of you, okay, it'll work out. But I have no cognitive space to figure out how to work it out until after Sunday, after I'm done with a little run. So once that's all behind me, then things will be good. I do at 3:30. That was the wrong language. I was about to say I have the opportunity to speak to our alumni as part of this Professor of the Year stuff, which I think is crazy. Like, it's so weird. It's like, okay, here's an award, and then you get these obscure situations where it's like, now you have 12 minutes to prove it. You know, you have to, it's like, okay. So, but this is supposed to be like a 45-minute lecture. I can barely contain you guys for a 45-minute lecture, let alone people who have no reason to actually listen to what I'm saying, you know? Like, I just don't know how it's going to go. And I don't really like to give lectures anyhow. I don't like to hold forth. So, some of you know Caleb Federoff. He was hilarious. I mentioned to my class yesterday that I was having trouble putting everything together for this lecture. And he said, well, what's the title? And I told him, why don't you just put that up on the slide and say, now let's discuss. Do I even remember the title? It's really an academic title that, you know, I don't know. Let's see. Moving from independent exceptionalism to shared excellence in interdependence. That's the title.
What does that even mean?
What it means is that, and I guess this is why I'm nervous, okay? Because, like, I figure, have you ever heard of the mark of the Achilles from the Greek myths? It's this idea that you're untouchable, you know? I feel like I've got the mark of the Achilles because I'm an alumni. My name's on the rock. No one's going to fire me, right? So I feel like I have an opportunity to say some things to our alumni that maybe they don't really want to hear. So I think that's also why I'm a little nervous. So, you know, because have you noticed there's a little vibe around here of people like, oh, we're Grove City College, we're so great, and we're totally independent from the rest of the world. Well, you've heard it. I'm getting nodding heads. In some ways, that's nice because it does make us think about what is our special contribution. But in other ways, it's a little bit damning because it kind of sequesters us off from the world, and we should be maybe more engaged. I mean, in our major, we wouldn't be able to do what we do if we didn't partner with very diverse stakeholders who maybe have different missions than us and different, you know, like, we're the only department that deals with any federal regulations whatsoever on this campus. And it's not a negative, it's actually a positive, you know. It actually helps us to have a place at the table for the common good. So that's my speech in a nutshell. Okay, so anyhow, hopefully the alumni will like it, we'll see. So I'm a little rattled because of that. I have posted your PowerPoint today. We're talking about phonics, which I know is not the most great subject, but I find it interesting, so hopefully you will too. Seems to me there was one more thing that I wanted to share with you, but I forget what it was. Anybody have the opportunity to go meet your kiddos yet? Anybody have? Yeah. So we have a couple people. So was it good? All right. Very good. So, you know, those will begin rolling. I had an interesting afternoon yesterday where I had a visit from a young lady and her mother who goes to another school district, and the mom's so concerned about her daughter's reading, and I was doing some assessments in there. And the thought occurred to me that as I was working with this student, as you start working with your students and you start getting a notion of what their needs are, even though we've gone over all kinds of diagnostic assessments that you can do, if you feel like I don't know what else to ask this student to do so that I can find out what's going on, come and talk to me and let me be a part of that, okay? Overall, with your field work, do not approach this field work of Okay, now I'm going to just be on my own independently, and I'm going to prove to everybody that, kind of like the title of my speech, don't be so exceptional in your independence. Let me share with you how to make this an excellent experience for you and your student. That's what it's really meant to be. Okay, so don't be afraid to come to me and say, I want to know what to do next. Okay? All right. So shall we jump into? Oh, I know what the other thing was that I was supposed to tell you. So my little mom is coming onto campus to hear my speech. I'm kind of convinced it's going to be me and her and like two other people. That's what I'm kind of convinced it's going to be. But anyhow, I don't know if this was wise, and I don't know if she'll take me up on this offer. But I said, you know what, Mom? I teach until 2:50. Why don't you come a little bit early and you can meet my students? I know, it's so fun. It's so fun, but I don't know if you will, okay? So I'm just going to warn you now. And I will also warn you because, you know, my parents now get there too, probably quicker than they did. They hit that age where they just say whatever they talk about the mark of Achilles, right? It comes to age right there. And I just want to warn you, and maybe she won't go there, but I just want to warn you, it's about a 2-minute differential between hello, how are you, and it's Obama's fault. So, like, she may go there. You get it? Right.
Yeah, that's where's my dad.
Okay, so we'll see. She's really cute. I hope she comes. Okay, so we'll find out. I'll show. No, she's not.
So she's just here for you.
She's just here because, you know, this is grand entertainment for her. It says something about her choices of things to do on a Friday afternoon. Okay? All right. And she has some friends coming too. All right. All right, let's talk about teaching phonics. Okay? All right, here we go. So, let's talk about some really important things you need to know about what the research says about teaching phonics to kids with trouble learning to read. Okay? The first thing is that whatever approach you take, it has to be systematic. You have to have a long-range plan for this. It cannot be just, I'll teach things here and there. You have to really think out, what am I teaching? How am I going to teach it? And you have to have kind of a sequence to it. So that's one thing. So this is an important approach that you should take, all right? Now, the other piece of this, and this sounds kind of straightforward, but you have to be strategic about that. Let me ask you, what is the point of teaching phonics? Why do we teach phonics? Why do we do it? Yeah, it's so that kids can read. It's so they can apply those phonics to decode words, right? That sounds so simple, but there is so many phonics programs out there that seems to put the emphasis on, can the kid master all these phonics skills? And they don't do enough to have the child master the phonics skills while engaged in the act of reading. All right? So the point that I want to make right away is, regardless of whatever approach you adopt, if you're handed a curriculum and they say, here it is, go for it, you have to really look carefully and you have to say, is this systematic enough for my students? And if it's not, what can I do to make it so? And is it strategic enough? Are they getting enough experience with immediately applying what they're learning in the real act of reading? Okay, because that's the goal. That's why you're doing it. All right, so it's so important to do that. Okay, I really need to learn to remember to bring my PowerPoint so it doesn't do this. I'm sorry about that. Okay, so that's important. So if you can be systematic and strategic, you know, that's not a method. That's your philosophy as the teacher, all right? So that underlies all of this stuff. So there's different types of phonics approaches, and they have these different names. And it's really important to have you understand what these terms are, because When you're looking at programs and evaluating whether they'll work for your kids, being able to understand the approach that the phonics program takes can help you to be more systematic and more strategic. And you never know, sometimes in interviews these terms come up. So it's important to kind of understand that this jargon is good for you to know as someone who's going to work with kids with reading needs. All right? So I'm going to go through each one of these. All right. So the first one that I want to talk about is analytic phonics, and sometimes it's called implicit phonics. The idea with this is that you teach several words to a student in kind of a whole word method, and all of those words have some phonic element alike with them. So maybe I'm teaching the words shout, ship, shape. Okay, what's the phonic element that I'm teaching? The SH sound, right? And I might be doing it with vowel sounds and things like that. The idea is I'm giving the students lots of exposure to words that have the same phonic element, and I want them to kind of implicitly pull away what that common phonic element is, and therefore they're going to be exposed to it and learn it. Sometimes we call that the whole to part method. Now, that is a method that sometimes works really well with some students, but it has been found to be less effective for those students that struggle. All right? Why do you think that is? That it's found to be less effective for those students that may struggle with reading? Yes?
Well, if they have to implicitly find out about it, they may not catch on to the pattern that all the words start with.
Right, right. So what you're saying is we're kind of leaving it up to chance that they're going to figure it out. Why not just be more explicit in the first place, right? One of the things that's interesting is that if you also pair what we know about readers who struggle with that rapid automatic naming concept, and also that idea of the connection of phonemic awareness and alphabetic principles, if kids are challenged in those areas, they're likely going to be challenged with this method, right? So that makes a lot of sense, all right? Sometimes people call this the check and guess method, like, I'm going to see if I get it, and hopefully I will, so you can see that could be kind of a challenge. Now, what happens with this is a lot of times materials with this will use very predictable, repetitive books where the phonic element is presented again and again and again, all right? So, for example, if I went down to the curriculum library, I could find a couple little books like this right on our shelves, and there are things like, look at the rat cat sitting on the hat mat. Like you see this pattern again and again. Now, one of the things that I want to point out to that is that when you try to control those phonic elements so much, or like, I'm trying to think of even a way of coming up with an SH story, and right now my mind's just not going there with anything that's appropriate to say. So, one of the things though about this, you're getting it, one of the things about this is that that's not really real authentic reading. I mean, do you ever pick up, is that what real stories look like? Are they that tightly controlled? And so there's another element here where one, it's maybe not as systematic as it needs to be, and two, maybe it's not as strategic as it needs to be. Now, I'm not saying that you should never use predictable and repetitive books. They have their place. But if you overuse that as your main vehicle for teaching phonics, all right, then you're probably doing your students a disservice by limiting it too much for them. Okay, so that's an important concept with analytic phonics. Okay, then we get into synthetic phonics. All right, synthetic phonics is currently the one that is most endorsed by reading researchers. And the idea, I'd love to show you this handout, but I didn't post it yet. I have a handout on my GCC that has all of the phonic elements, okay? Maybe you got them in primary lit, maybe you did, maybe you didn't. And I'll post it to Pinterest too, okay, because we like that, right? But, the point is that this approach really have with Prime Lit. That's a synthetic phonics approach. It really looks at the different phonic elements and how you can proceed with that. There are some programs that have really taken a look at, there are some that have looked at what are the most common phonic elements that appear in written language. What are the ones that we should teach first? And then we should teach the, next frequent one second and third and so on and so forth. What's interesting is if you combine this idea of synthetic phonics with this idea of being really, really systematic, you could really tie in that research of, wow, these are the most common sounds that we hear in English words. Let's teach those first. Let's move to these next, so on and so on and so on and so forth. You follow me on that? Okay? That fits in with everything we know about Vygotsky and our, kind of frame of experience. And it's more likely that teaching that way will be fruitful because students will be seeing those phonic elements in print and being able to apply them in more real, authentic reading situations. So both phonics and phonemic awareness are tied together with this. And this is really, really important. I talked about this need for being systematic, but this is so key. Brief cycles of instruction, okay? Brief cycles of instruction. How many of you, and you do this as a learner with other things, you don't do it with phonics, but you do it with other things, right? So like, you've all experienced this. You have a song you like that's on the radio, right? And you want to sing along, and so maybe it's on Pandora or whatever, maybe you don't listen to the radio. So there's a song you like, and so, the first time you hear it, you kind of catch the chorus, and you're like, you don't know exactly what all the words are, okay? And so what do? The next time that you listen to the song, you try to listen to a little bit more. But do any of you, and maybe I don't want to know if you do this, okay? I have a feeling, let me rephrase my words. I have a feeling that none of you, or very few, when you like a song, sit there and go, I'm going to hit that play button again and again and again and again and again for 45 minutes until I know every word. Oh, it's funny how some of you are looking around at your peers and like, I live with you, and maybe you're That's so funny. But most of the time, okay, what you do is you expose yourself to these elements that you're learning. Oh, I've lost you. You want to talk about how, yes, you totally did that. Okay, or you're making fun of somebody that does. That's funny. I did it. It is hilarious. That is so funny. Let me just take a moment. I love you, people. But anyhow, my point is, for the readers, can we go back to that brief cycled instruction is best, okay? Do not skill and kill them, all right? Don't do that. Drill and skill and kill, you can put all of those kind of analytic phonics there, right? So, you want to be able to have students have these briefer cycled instructions. And you've got to connect it to the text. You have got to. If you don't, it's less effective. Now, here's something to be aware of, all right? One of the things that's really tough with beginning reading materials is that a lot of times those stories that are in the early basals that the kids are reading, they're picked and they don't necessarily have a lot of exposure to the phonic elements. It would be a good thing for you to study, like go and look at a first grade reading book in the curriculum library, and you'll see that maybe the teacher is teaching the TH sound in the beginning story, very early in their, reading progress. And that story might actually only have 2 words with the TH sound in it, okay? So I could make the argument that there's a sweet spot between this approach of mat, pat, fat, cat, sat on a mat, or whatever, and not enough exposure. So you've got to be strategic in thinking about, do my students' reading material starting to take hold of that, okay? So if they don't, what do? Well, make your own. You know, you can make your own. You can write little notes to your student that purposely include that. I think I mentioned to you that my best friend's youngest, she's freaked out about his reading. He's going to be just fine. Okay, I wish she wouldn't do that, but you know, that's what happens when you become a mother. You're neurotic. So anyhow, just remember that. It's all ladies in here, okay? You know, if you become a mother, don't be neurotic. It's hard not to, but anyhow. But it's interesting because one of the things we're doing to help him grow in his reading, he's the youngest out of four, and he wants to read for real purposes that are important. And all the baby books that he has, he's like totally over it, okay? Most kids his age would be like, oh, I want to read that, but he has all older siblings, so he wants to engage in literacy the way that they are. Do you know what I'm doing with him to help him learn to read better? We're text messaging. We're text buddies, okay? So he'll get his mom's phone, and he'll send me a little text, or he'll write something out and take the picture and send it to me. And I'll text him back, and you know what I'm purposely doing? I'm purposely including words with those phonic elements that I know he's struggling with. And I'm trying to do it in an authentic way, all right? So my overall point is that if the text materials that come with whatever you're doing to support your reader aren't robust enough, remember that print is everywhere. And you can be creating your own materials for students, engineering them, whether it's a story or whether it's notes back and forth or those kinds of things, and you can be slipping in more power, right, for their exposure to these phonic elements. Make sense? All right. I already talked about how Beck's book fits into this notion. I do want to say a word about the older struggling reader, okay? The major challenge for us as educators with the older struggling reader, when they're having issues where you think the issue may be incomplete phonics knowledge, how do you know that? Well, maybe you do a miscue analysis and you see a certain pattern of errors. Or maybe you have them read through word list and you start noticing that certain phonic elements they're always messing up. And you think, okay, maybe they're having trouble with confusion on certain phonic elements. Well, the major issue with the older reader is much like with what we talked about with phonemic awareness. Do not reinvent the wheel. Try to determine where the holes are and fix those holes as opposed to going back and trying to fix everything. That is a complete waste of time to try to teach them everything all over again because most of it they probably already know. You need to do some things to focus on what they don't know. How do you do that? Well, it's easy. You're going to take a look at the document that I said was on my GCC in this PowerPoint and will be shortly after 4:30 today, okay? You're going to look at that, and you can make words up with flashcards in those. You can take that approach, and you can see which one of those they consistently miss with the phonic elements. You could even give them the phonic elements as a flashcard just to be able to say, can they do this sound in isolation? You just make two files. Ones they know, ones they don't. Don't let them see it, much like you would with sight words, right? And that way you can fix the gaps. I will say this about that, whether we're talking about sight words or whether we're talking about phonic elements, be sure in your practice as you're helping them to master new elements, every lesson, throw in one or two that you already know they can do, right? That goes back to philosophy of building success, right? So you don't want them to be completely overwhelmed with, new terms. You want to try to connect that with some things that you know they know, all right? Okay, so that's about the synthetic phonics. Okay, we talked about this yesterday a little bit, okay? We talked about, and how is this different than the implicit phonics that we talked about earlier? Well, this is a lot like that, but you're being much more strategic this time and explicit about pointing out, hey, this is the phonic element. This is the one that is common between all of these. So this is a word family approach. Now, one of the great resources in this is from a woman named Cunningham. She is really cool, all right? And she made a couple little books that when you look at them, they don't look like they're anything significant. But really, them in the curriculum library. So when you start working with your readers, if you start getting a notion that I think my reader is struggling with these phonic elements, I would recommend pulling some of the Cunningham books and getting some activities from them for your reader. But what she came up with was this idea of how do I help the reader build word patterns, all right? So these are kind of the word wall words that we talked about yesterday, 2 days ago, right? We talked about those, but she took it one step further and she came up with, kind of these scripted lessons where you have the children move letter tiles and they build these words, okay? And the reason why her books are really kind of interesting is because she has a strategic approach to this idea of teaching word walls. Do you remember how I told you that if you're going to do the word wall words, you've got to really make it clear to students and give them those bootstraps to be able to pick up what these patterns are? Well, her approach was to say, I want to explicitly teach them these sounds, and then I want them building words themselves that use these sounds. So a typical lesson, and you've probably heard things like this from Prom Lit, but let's find two sounds that will make the sound at. Let's build the word at. Now, how can we change at to make it into cat? Now what can we do to change cat into cat? What if I want to change it back to cat? How do I change it to cat? Okay, you see how that just like twisted around a little bit each time? So it's a lot like this implicit phonics, but the difference is you're being very, very explicit and very, very strategic about building a student's knowledge base in that area. Okay? So that's good stuff. Let me get this to work here. Now, you'll note on the slide, there it is, that this has been found to be very effective with struggling readers. I talked about this concept of how you can teach core words. And the idea is overlearn those core words. Make sure they're really automatic to the student so that that creates that mental bootstrap, right? And then this is this little fat cat, but I would change it to baby cat, so on and so forth. Cat, okay? And I have another handout that I'm going to post, and it's the common word wall words, okay? It's from her research and others that have said, hey, here's the great words that you should be using for these patterns, okay? So that's Cunningham. Any questions about that? Oh, here we go. This is the one I want to show you. Look, there they are. No, yeah, there they are. Those are all the word wall words. But I'm going to post it. Not yet. It's not yet on my GCC, but it will be. Okay? All right? And some of these, this is interesting. Sometimes you can walk into a classroom that's really into this program. Can you see it at all? Probably not. But like if you walk into a classroom that's really into this program, some of these words are in one color, some of them are in another color. And the words that are in one color are words that you can find other words that are like them with the pattern. Some of the words, and typically the color they give them is red, and these are words that are really unique, and you just kind of have to learn those words, and they have fewer words that you can build off of them. Fascinating stuff, okay? Like for instance, will is a word that I can put in the color green, right? Because it has lots of other words. Actually, and then who could fit with that, with two, and who, all of that stuff. But there's others that aren't so, like, well, even though a lot of these can work. But, I think I saw tomorrow up there. Question, that's the TION that they're, so you can go to town on it. I'm going to give you lots of resources. You'll see it, okay, when I post it. All right, very good. Now, spelling-based and embedded phonics, okay? This is something that I actually have seen right here in our local school district, all right? The idea with this is that instead of just having separate lessons for phonics, why don't we pull it together with spelling lessons? Why don't we help students to be able to see this with spelling lessons? Now, way you're hopefully going to learn these phonic elements. The emphasis here is on getting kids to use those words in their own writing. The challenge here is that, one, you can lose that systematic approach. Two, spelling is actually a very different task than reading. Have you ever wondered why I don't spend a lot of time talking about spelling? You know, the reality is cognitive skills that you need to read, pull in all this comprehension information, all this stuff about discourse and all this beautiful stuff. Spelling is a memorized activity, okay? I know a lot of challenged readers that are actually really, really good at spelling, right? They're good at memorizing. They're not good, that's kind of a lower order Bloom taxonomy kind of deal. And they're not so good about synthesizing all of that for the reading text. Likewise, I'm sure some of you can relate to this. Maybe when you were a kid, spelling was not your forte. Maybe it's still not, okay? Maybe, oh, funny. Okay, maybe like you still are like, thank goodness that Bill Gates gave me, you know, like a spell check for my life, right? But that didn't mean that you were a poor reader, right? So one of the challenges with this is that the research isn't so robust that connects these two ideas with spelling and reading. All right, now, in the hands of a great teacher, if you are really being systematic about getting your kids to write a lot with those spelling words, then it's better. But most teachers, because of the tyranny of time, they just focus on, are you spelling it? Let's do our little spelling test. Let's move on, okay? That's not systematic enough for this. Now, oh, I can't even drive a PowerPoint today. Okay. Now, embedded phonics means not having any systematic approach at all to phonics instruction. Just listening to your reader, seeing where they struggle, and deciding you're going to teach those phonics issues as they pop up. Okay. Can you guess what the research says about that? Yeah, it says it kind of. Okay. Now, here's the interesting thing. For really kids with really good phonemic awareness and really good rapid automatic naming, you know, there should be a word for that. We've talked about the double deficit hypothesis when they don't have those two things. There should be a word for when they're like off the charts good at both of those things. This approach is the best approach for them. This approach is outstanding for those kids, okay? These are your kids who may be in gifted programs. That's part of your degree too. We don't talk a lot about that in this class because the class is reading disabilities. But I could make this comment that if you find yourself charged with trying to excel that reader that is good in those two areas, this is actually a really, really good approach because they have the two drivers that help them to be successful with this. My Abby and my Ben fit into this area. My Ben especially, I think I told you he taught himself to read with the closed captioning. Okay, so like for Ben it's so interesting because even now I've never met a word the kid can't sound out. Abby, a few years back, and maybe I even played it to your class, but I have an audio tape of her reading out loud a passage. And, you know, she can read all the way up through the 8th grade level without, and this was when she was in 1st grade. She doesn't understand anything she's reading at the 8th grade level in the little clip, but she can do it, right? So for some kids, they are a master of just that incidental learning. But for the challenged reader, no, okay? That's too haphazard. And this is the other thing. Oh, man, really can't even, okay. So the other thing about this is that what were you just saying about spelling-based approaches? What kind of speller were you, Dr. Nichols? Not good. Bill Gates can't even help me. Okay. The other thing that's really fascinating is when you have this approach, the reader who is challenged, it encourages them to do dumb things. Okay. It encourages them to make wild guesses that have nothing to do with what's on the page. I was working with a little reader yesterday afternoon, 4th grader, lovely young lady. Her mom is worried about her reading, so she brought her into the office to find out what she should be doing to help her. And this fourth grader, I gave her word lists. You remember how we talked about that as a diagnostic tool? Because I wanted to quickly get a gauge for where I should put her in reading passages. I didn't want to overstress her. I wanted to begin someplace that was just right. And so I wasn't quite sure where she should fall. She did beautifully on all the word lists, and she got to the fifth grade level, so just above where she is in school. And the words were things there like ancient, and she said ambulance when she saw it, ancient, okay? And, she was really accurate on that fourth grade list. So, like, I can't say that it's a phonics issue where she doesn't know how to decode the word, right? Because she's clearly, if she's reading fluently at the fourth grade level, she's got good decoding skills. For her, though, she has had this approach to attacking new words where you just kind of are guessing as you come to them, and she didn't take the time to really be strategic about her reading. It was also a vocabulary issue. Every word that she missed was a word that was a little bit outside of her vocabulary comfort zone. And so one of the things that we see with poor readers is that a lot of times their challenges aren't just in one area, especially for that older challenged reader. It's not just a matter of, I don't really have the best decoding skills, or I don't know all my phonics elements. Sometimes they have these other compounding issues, like my vocabulary is a little bit weak. So, those kind of things start flowing together and start creating a situation where when she's in the act of reading, and she did this in her reading passages too, when encountered with a word that she could take the time and sound out and pause and think about the meaning of that word, instead of doing that, she would just quickly make a guess, all right? That happens a lot with our challenged readers. And research shows that these approaches of just teaching phonics as you need them actually encourage them to do that over more, okay? So be careful about that. All right, let's see, how are we doing on time? Maybe I'll get done early, and my little mom won't even be able to come and visit with you. All right, here's what I want to talk about, okay? One of the things that is really important to do, and I might, I don't know, maybe, I don't know, we'll see if we have time to do this at some point this semester. But it would be good to do it a little bit after we have more stuff under our belt. There is this concept of the stated and the hidden curriculum, all right? What I mean by that is you have a hidden curriculum in all things all the time. I don't want to go into all that ideology. But in reading, it happens all the time, too. You have reading materials that might be saying to teachers in the teacher's manual, hey, teach it this way. But the activities that the kids are doing might not fit that way well. And then that creates this situation where you have this disconnect between this idea of we have to be systematic about our instruction. Do you follow me on all of that? Okay. The other thing is this idea that you've got to really apply all of this stuff. And if your curriculum doesn't have the materials that help the reader to apply it, it doesn't matter how well you teach the phonics if they're not applying it right. They're really going to struggle. All right? The next point on here. One size fits all. All right? I get so sick of this as an educator that it just makes me want to scream. And nowhere in the education continuum is it more prevalent than the struggling reader. Schools are always looking for the silver bullet thing, all right? And especially in phonics. This new phonics program is all you need. Hooked on phonics. Everybody needs hooked on phonics. Let's all do hooked on phonics, okay? Or whatever the next thing that comes along. Let's all do Waterford reading. Let's all do, all of this stuff. For a while, the big rage was this thing called open court reading with phonics. And it had some great stuff in it. It connected phonics elements to like physical motion and stuff like that. That's awesome, but that's not the only way. You cannot do a one-size-fits-all, because the reality is, even though I've showed you on all of these slides that research shows this and research shows that, no researcher knows your student. So if you can be aware as a teacher of these different approaches to teaching phonics, one thing that you really ought to think about doing right away is thinking, what has my student been exposed to in the past? What approach is it? And you're never going to open up a teacher's manual and they're not going to say, this is the embedded phonics approach. You have to figure that out for yourself based on what I've told you about these methods. Here's my big teaching point. If it didn't work before, it's probably not going to work again, right? So that means that you should be flexible enough to approach the phonics learning in a different way to see if that different way may speak to your student that you're trying to improve their reading with, all right? So that's the point of the next bullet, too. If you can have great teaching, now one comment about that. Sometimes it isn't the approach to phonics. Sometimes it's that the teacher who was teaching the phonics stopped at that approach to phonics, okay? So you've got to be aware of those issues, too, all right? And you've got to focus on your own little reader, all right? You have to think about their strengths, but sometimes their strengths can be a huge weakness. I had another reader in my office last year, and she, God bless her, was really a reader who really liked to please. You know, that was like part of her identity. And it's interesting to me how personality fits into reading needs too. Because if this little reader that was in my office yesterday, for example, if I could just I'd like to bottle up her happy little spirit. She was such a joyful little thing. She just, and nothing fazed her. Like the list of hard words where she knew she was plowing through them and screwing them up all along. She was like, oh, that's great. She did not, she had this lovely thing of not caring. Well, actually that strength of hers of not caring was actually a weakness for her in her reading, all right? So you have to kind of think about the personality of your reader and how this fits into this. Back to my other example that I was about to share, this little reader from last year, she was someone who liked to please so much. So when she would come to a word that she didn't know for sure, 100%, I've got it in the book up here, she would be so deliberate about slowing her reading down and sounding it out. And what was interesting was, in a story where that word would show up more than one time, she was not good at taking risks and saying, I did that earlier, I can do it again. She would slow her reading down, and she was incredibly accurate, but it was a weakness for her to, try to be so systematic every time she came to it. She could benefit from a different approach to phonics, not because the other approach wasn't serving her well, but because it kind of conflicted with how she was made up as a little person. Do you see what I'm saying about that? I could make that argument that word war words for her would be awesome, okay, because she would then get this mentality of, okay, what are patterns? How can I use those? Fascinating stuff, all right? So know your reader, but know your reader in a way where you can connect what you're learning about these theories of word learning, of phonics,